Welcome to the Unfiltered podcast. Unfiltered is the podcast for leaders who involve others, use their influence to help them rise and inspire them to become better versions of themselves. The Unfiltered podcast showcases leaders who lead from the heart to make a positive change. And today we have Teresa Quinlan. Thank you, Teresa, for being my guest today and joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mohammed. I'm very excited to be here with you today.
Likewise, I'm really looking forward to our discussion. I'm just going to give listeners a bit of background on who Teresa is. So, Teresa Quinlan is an executive coach and leadership development EQI certified practitioner, building emotionally intelligent organizations through executive coaching, leadership development, team emotional intelligence development, and employee well-being. With over 20 years experience leading people and 16 years training and developing leaders, Teresa advocates for emotionally intelligent leadership that paves the way for organizations that are human first, human centered, and human focused. And that is why she's our unfiltered leader and guest for today's podcast. Welcome, Teresa.
Thanks. That's a mouthful. Even though, if you ask maybe my mother, she will say, oh no, she's been leading since kindergarten. Because when the teacher asked who would like to watch the class when I leave, my hand always shot up. I'm like, I will take the role of the leader.
Why is that? So let's get right into it. Why have you always felt that you are inherently a leader?
I'm not sure at that young age that it was an inherent leadership compared to maybe, going first or being responsible. I liked responsibility from a young age. It never seemed to bother me. The more, the better. I enjoyed pushing myself to see what am I actually capable of doing. And lucky for me, I grew up in an environment that was readily making those opportunities available.
And Teresa, I can just tell from speaking with you and from having watched some of your content online, you are a person who's not afraid to take the mic or to speak publicly or to be the, have the spotlight shone on, right? But you deal with a lot of people in your profession who aren't as extroverted as you are, who aren't as comfortable with being in the spotlight. And leaders, sometimes we expect them to, we make the mistake that all leaders have to be extroverts. But I think, and I think you'll agree with me, that's not the case. So can you maybe just unpack that for me?
Absolutely. And I 100% agree with you. I mean, extroversion is a personality trait, and we all land somewhere on the extroversion scale. Introversion is not a trait. We don't land on an introversion scale, right? So basically, if I'm low extroversion, we just label people that an introvert. So it doesn't mean, like I've run into people who are self-proclaimed introverts that mistakenly are like, actually you're shy, but you're definitely not an introvert. You aren't someone who recharges in solitude. You actually recharge connecting and being with other people. And so making sure we have maybe the definition correct of what are we actually looking like or looking for and talking about. And then I think secondary to that in leadership is you can teach the skill of extroversion. My mother had us in public speaking from a very young age. It was something that she said, I don't care if you like it or not, or you hate it.
Shows.
Or if you hate memorizing poems or standing in front of people and being critiqued on your ability to deliver, this skill will come in handy at one point in your life. And I'm making sure that you develop it from a young age. There was a lot of things that she did like that. And, when we were a kid, we hated it. But as an adult, it's like, yep, she was right.
Thank you, Mom.
Thank you, Mom. Things that definitely helped. So in leadership, we have to look at, if I happen to be an introvert or low on the extroversion scale, when might that hinder me? And so what do I need to do to make sure that it doesn't get in my way? It doesn't mean I can't be a leader. It means I need to know, just like extreme extroversion, that could get in my way as a leader. If I don't know when to be quiet and let other people take the center stage, give other people recognition, extreme extroversion is also not a great quality in leadership. And so for me, it's all about balancing and understanding from an individual perspective, when does my natural tendency help me and when does it hinder me? And what is the balance to when it's hindering me?
And that's what emotional intelligence is all about, is it's developing that self-awareness, but also being able to strike that balance. And that balance is different for all of us. Just like leadership is very diverse, that balance of how introverted we profess to be, or actually display ourselves to be, or how extroverted we tend to be, it's creating that balance, but it's also situational, right? So leadership, as well as our level of introversion, extroversion, is situational. Can you talk to me about that, and what have you seen in the work that you've done?
In my own personal leadership career, so when I was leading people in the beginning of my career, I really did take the approach, or lean toward the approach, that, you know, I earned this position, and so I must be at the front, and I must go first, and I must demonstrate and teach people and pass on knowledge. And I very quickly learned from feedback from other people that is not necessarily the case. You don't always need to go first. You don't always need to model. Sometimes you need to let people fall on their face, because that's a better learning opportunity for them than arming them with the life jacket and the wings and all of the skills and saying, here, now you're prepared to step in. So I think what I can see quite frequently in leadership is a lot of the necessity of being able to identify, when am I at the front? When am I at the side? When am I at the back? Like, where do I need to be as a leader to best position the individuals in the opportunities with the right resources for them to exceed goals, for them to achieve things they didn't even know they were capable of achieving? It's kind of like, as a leader, you are the watchman in the clock, and you're making sure all of the cogs are fitting together and they're properly oiled, and you need a PhD in your people to be able to figure out how that actually is going to work for each person. And then you lead that person how they need to be led. You don't arrive with a leadership style and like everyone follows suit. I mean, we call that dictatorship. That doesn't work.
Right. I love that. I love your analogy of being the watch person in the tower and looking at the cogs, right? And let's admit, you and I are no strangers to leadership, and to us, it's not only second nature, it's probably our first nature, right? But I bet you we just scared the heck out of a lot of people, because maybe they don't have that skill set. Maybe they don't know how to start building it. Maybe that level of self-awareness or awareness of others is not quite there. Maybe they're just scared shitless of, oh my God, this is way too much responsibility. You know what? I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you deal when people, display that level of trepidation? How do you calm them down? How do you make them feel comfortable?
Well, number one, it's not my responsibility to calm them down or make them feel comfortable. It's their responsibility to recognize, you know what, leadership is not for me. And to be okay with having made that decision. So my responsibility is to ask the questions that allow them to unlock, what is my purpose? Where do my strengths lie? And then if I know those things, what are the roles within which I will excel, so that I can use all of my strengths to my advantage and play in my arena or zone of spiral of genius? Because if you or I picked anything that was outside of that realm of playing to our strengths and within our purpose, then we would be feeling unwell and unfulfilled, and our life would be meh. Like, it would just feel so something is missing. And oftentimes that's the pivot point for people, is something's a little off. I'm not quite fully satisfied. I know that there is something more. And that is probably one of the best questions we can ask ourselves in our own personal evolution, is paying attention to the fact that, wait a minute, I just said there's something more, which means, yes, there's something more.
Right.
Take a minute, take weeks, take months, take years to really settle into investigating, what is the more? Why is the more? And how do I want to go about living in that day in and day out? Because I disagree with Simon Sinek when he's like, anybody could be a leader. I don't think so. And I don't say that because I am a leader, and I believe I was a very good one. And people I led graced me with feedback to said I did well. I say that because I truly believe that some people are not meant for leadership, and it's not a slight in any stretch of the imagination. It's a job like any other job. Some people aren't meant for nursing. Some people aren't meant for police
Right.
work. Some people aren't meant for trades. Like some people aren't meant to be a teacher. You have to know what you're meant for, and knowing has a feeling.
So let me challenge you here, and I love how you define leadership. And I'm going to challenge you because I think that we can actually empower people to have a leadership mindset. But help me out, because I think you and I are saying the same thing. We're saying it differently. Do you believe that people can have a leadership mindset, and in certain situations they can certainly display leadership qualities, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have to put on a leadership hat? Can you clarify or maybe just take me down that path?
Sure. And that might be one of the distinctions we make in like management roles and leadership roles, because they're two different words. Sometimes we're using them interchangeably. So if I have management title, position, responsibilities, I might like knock it out of the park as a manager, but I have little interest in leading other people. Like I have little interest in coaching people to greater levels of success. I have little interest in, providing spaces of psychological safety for innovation to exist and creativity to exist. I have little interest in communicating with vision and purpose, and I have little interest in that, which for me means then you don't want to be a leader, but you might be a great manager of stuff. You just might not be a great leader of people. So perhaps that is the distinction we're making. We are saying maybe the same thing. I agree that leadership traits, just like any sort of trait, are inherent and innate. And then if they're inherent and innate to you and you also develop them, look out. But if they're not innate to you, you can learn leadership skills.
Right. It's a learned skill. So, right, and it's something that, like riding a bike, you first take off the training wheels, you get on the bike, you go down the street, eventually you're going, hands-free, right? It's a skill, but maybe I don't want to ride a bike. Maybe
Yeah,
I don't, right?
That's
maybe
right.
It's not, right?
Yeah.
And leadership, yeah, it's like I don't want to ride a bike. I want to go for a walk, or I'm going to get in my car. And we have to respect that responsibility of leading others. Let's go where Simon Sinek has gone. And, he said that this awakening for him happened when he was serving, I believe it was, I believe he was in the army, but let's just say he was in combat. And this is where he was exposed to leadership qualities, right? How many of us actually want to be on the front lines and having people's backs because it's a life or death situation?
Mm-hmm.
I don't. But you know what? Daily, we're having people's backs when we are leaders in the workplace or in our communities or in our household, because we recognize that we have to help them make decisions that help not only their physical safety, but their emotional and spiritual and emotional safety. And therefore, maybe I'm not saving you from sniper, but that inner critic or that stressor that's causing you angst that can eventually take away your well-being, that's also helping you. And some people don't want that responsibility. Some people say, you know what? I'm going to show up at work. I'm a subject matter expert. I'm going to get my work done. That's me. Or I'm going to be there for my folks. I'm going to teach them how to get work done. I'm going to manage the project and manage the expectations. But don't expect me to sit there and have the one-on-ones with people and enlighten them, or having them find that inner enlightenment motivation, as you say, they've got to step into it themselves. That's just not my job. So I think we have to recognize where it's a skill set that maybe some people don't want the responsibility to own.
And may not have the aptitude to learn. Right? Because if it's a learnable trait, everyone has an IQ static by the time we hit 19. And what we learn about and the depths to what we learn is it's stamped by our IQ basically. And so case in point, I grew up with 3 siblings. So I have an older sister, a younger brother, and a younger sister. And my older sister, her IQ aptitude for the arts and language was off the charts. Mine was not. But in math and science, nailed it.
Yeah,
And
I can see that.
we were born by the same parents. So in essence, the same genetic coding coming together under the same roof, but we manifest it entirely different, even down to our intellectual quotient. And my younger brother was a little bit more like me, math and science, and my younger sister, a little bit more like my older sister, very much into the arts, right? So I think it's really quite interesting when we take a look at these topics and break them down to sort of like the biology of them, because sometimes the conceptual idea of, and you know, on video right now, I'm kind of rolling my eyes. I'm doing this thing where like the conceptual idea, let's get beyond concept every once in a while, because it's nice to sort of talk about these things. But for me, if assimilation and integration into doing and then getting sort of the results we want to see from it doesn't happen, then I'm like, you can blah, blah, blah all day long. Let's get to putting these things in practice and seeing if it works. So I really like how Marcus Buckingham approaches leadership. He's like, it's very hard to define what makes a great leader, because you ask a room full of people to think of the best leader they ever had and to put the qualities of that leader on a paper, and everyone's paper is going to be different. Well, if a great leader can be defined, the qualities should all be the same. Case in point, they can't be, which means, to what you're saying, a leader might be better defined by, well, who's following this person at what point in time for what reason. So I might lead for a specific point in time under around a specific thing, and then my leadership run is over because no one else is following. But as long as I've got followers, that makes me a leader. So who decides who the leader is?
So let's open up the door and walk into our workplaces. You know, I imagine a lot of your work are with organizations and helping them get the most for, you know, with their employees. So let's go there. And I walk into a workplace and I bring my emotional intelligence along, which is, you know, this is something where you shine and you help people to investigate and get deeper into their EQ. And now what are we telling people when we are looking around the workplace and we figure out who are our leaders, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're not often using the criteria of emotional intelligence to identify leaders. We're not often using emotional intelligence as criteria to identify potential candidates either. It's often not on our performance management processes and our promotional processes. It's missing from a lot of spaces. However, emotional intelligence is often the foundation for anything we need to execute on. So you give me a line on a job profile of an expectation, and I'll give you the emotional intelligence skills that support executing on it. And this is why I think EQ matters way more than many organizations are seeing until you come into their organization and you get the folded arms for a little bit of like, okay, prove to me there's actual value to this. I'm like, I don't have to prove anything. The research is already done. Basically, I'm going to ask you to do the work and try something different and watch how different, number one, it feels and how much better your results become after that. And what people end up discovering early on is a lot of their limiting beliefs is what's in the way, number one. A lot of those limiting beliefs are associated to emotional memories that they're not paying attention to that show up in the present moment and influence or impact or bias or judge or paint with a particular color how they're interpreting a person, an event, an interaction, and then they behave poorly, which generally means when we behave poorly, we ruin a relationship. And it also means when we're behaving poorly, we're driving out of our emotions. And that means we're unable to access our IQ. So all of that time we spent learning and studying on a particular topic, we can't even access it because our emotion centers are in the way.
And what do you do differently, or how do you help them do things differently to get better results?
Yeah, ideally, you have to start from the top because the culture of an organization is set by its executive team. They set the tone for what it looks like, and everything that they do is saying we tolerate or do not tolerate this kind of behavior. And so with executives, it's all about 360 emotional intelligence, profiling and assessment. Basically, what do you think your EQ is? And now what are other people thinking your EQ is? And so we highlight these blind spots of like, oh my God, I thought I was being assertive. Turns out I'm being aggressive or passive aggressive. And now that I know, I can balance my emotional intelligence skills. Because in reality, most people have skills in emotional intelligence already. Our whole life sets us up for certain skills in emotional intelligence, but it also sets us up for a lot of imbalance in emotional intelligence. So I might be optimistic and not have strong reality testing, which means I tend to wear rose-colored glasses and everything's going to be great. And that's not always the case. And so if I'm an everything's always going to be great person, people lose confidence in me when shit hits the fan, right?
Right.
I might be someone who always speaks first, asserts my thoughts, my feelings, my beliefs in a way that is really quite articulate and perhaps aggressive, even though I think I might be asserting. And because I always go first and I'm in the leadership role, no one else says a peep, because who wants to challenge the leader? Nobody likes to challenge the leader. And when you do challenge the leader, they just reassert their opinions and thoughts and beliefs, or ask you a whole bunch of why do you think that? Why do you think that? With their eyebrows furrowed. And all of a sudden, everyone in the room is saying, don't ask a question. And so getting our executive leadership to be able to become emotionally intelligent across the spectrum of skills, and more importantly, to balance those things out so that under any situation, in any circumstance, they're approaching it with equalness in empathy and assertiveness, in independence and social responsibility, and emotional self-awareness and stress tolerance. Like, we just want to see balance across everything, no matter what's going on. And that sets your cultural tone, which allows other people to follow suit, because then we have strong accountability existing within the environment that if I behave in a way that is against our culture, someone calls me on it. And it could be anyone, because we've all agreed this is what our culture looks like and feels like. I know what it looks like because they're observable things. And I know what it feels like because I'm emotionally self-aware. And so if either of these things are off, I could be a peer, a direct report, your manager, I can call you on it. Meaning I say, something's off with you today. What's up? I noticed you blurted out your opinion in a meeting instead of waiting for someone to finish speaking. What's going on? And we observe the behavior, state it, and then we ask them, invite them into, like, tell me, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? And this gives the space and for permission for people to bring their emotions to work and be responsible for them.
And what you've just done, you've built the trust, which is the foundation to anything that's going to work well.
Everything.
Right? Everything. And, you know, Teresa, as you said that, and I think you just authored a book in your description of what that looked like in a workplace. It's powerful. And, you know, as powerful as that can be, pre-COVID, a lot of people may have just said, you know, I'm on camera, I'm kind of just dismissing my hand away, right? A lot of people could have just said, yeah, I get it. But I think what this pandemic has taught us, what the Black Lives Movement amplification this past summer, and even now what we're being taught is, hey, non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. We don't have it. So you who thinks that leadership is bequeathed upon you, or that somebody gave you this role, or Mr. or Mrs. Dictator, right? Like, sit back and watch the world fall down, or be ready to hold it up on your shoulders. Leadership is that responsibility. And so I don't think we can any longer dismiss the responsibility that we as leaders need to allow others to give us that feedback, that we can look into the mirror of the other and respectfully, acknowledge the feedback that they're giving us, whether they're a peer, someone who's senior in terms of role in the organization, a colleague. We have to be able to have enough confidence and enough trust and use that transparency to say, I am here to build you up by giving you the feedback that you need. You are here to build yourself up by choosing how you react or respond to it. And I just don't think that is something that we should let go of once things start getting a little, I don't want to say new normal. I want us to build a more wholesome reality where we're more aware of the environment and each other. And as we are doing that, and we are, this is September time where we're recording this. We are at the precipice of, do we fall back? Because right now the numbers are showing we've fallen back to what we were in July here in Ontario, and elsewhere in the world, things are shaky. Or do we move forward and build on the best practices? yes, COVID is about hand washing and being careful and wearing a mask, but it's also about cleansing our souls and not just our hands. It's cleansing what we haven't done enough to the environment, which is we've neglected it. The ozone layer hole in the ozone layer has actually closed, it's repaired itself. The environment is repairing itself. Our sense of humanity needs to also repair itself. And you don't do that if you don't bring emotional intelligence into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the way you've described it, we're all born with a certain level of, you know, we're born with the cells to become more emotionally intelligent, but we have to be intentional and know that we want to do things differently. How do you have those powerful and much needed conversations with people that you work with?
There's a lot of people that are straight up open and ready for it. You know, they've felt the shift and it feels good. So if, you know, we go, it feels pleasant. This isn't an unpleasant feeling. This is a pleasant one. And it's got a certain amount of hopefulness attached to it. I'm like, good, because that creates growth mindset. You know, Carol Dweck's work changed the landscape. Her work around intelligence changed the landscape for like education and workplaces. Crazy. When we looked at fixed, blended, and growth mindset, we aren't one or the other. We're all three. It just depends under which situation, with which person, which topics, which environment am I choosing growth mindset or fixed mindset? Because there are definitely some things in some days when I will be approached generally by a spouse and I'll be like, nope, not gonna. I'm like, oh, that's kind of really fixed mindset. Why? Well, there's an emotion under there that is attached to emotional memory, that when I experience this emotion, the narrative becomes no, not going to, and that just shuts any level of curiosity or openness off. And so if I'm emotionally aware that, oh, there that is, and I can be curious about it, then I can regulate it. If I'm not aware of it, I can't regulate it, and then it just gets in my way. Once I can regulate it, then I can look at another skill in emotional intelligence and intentionally choose that skill and apply it. It's just like when we're doing construction work, even handyman work around our house. We have a toolkit in front of us and we kind of assess the situation and go, which tool is going to be the best tool to use? And we pick the tool. And if we get it wrong, we put it back and we pick another tool.
Screwdriver doesn't work on a nail. You need a hammer.
Right. That's right. And sometimes we need to call a professional. So that's why we have coaches around the world that focus on emotional intelligence. Like, this is the work that I do for a reason. I spent the time cultivating the skill set of what it is, how it works, by doing the work myself and now doing it with hundreds of other people to arm them with these abilities. Because you can read so many wonderful books written on emotional intelligence, but reading does not gain skill set. Just like you mentioned, to ride a bicycle, you have to get on the bike. And when you get on, you can't ride the Tour de France. No one's giving you a yellow jersey. In fact, someone's probably holding your seat. But eventually what happens is you learn how to stabilize yourself. And then you learn how to go uphill and downhill and take those nasty corners. And you learn how to get off without falling. And it's kind of, that's the path in emotional intelligence. Is first we have to be aware, then we learn to regulate, then we learn the other skills in emotional intelligence to balance out what we're experiencing.
I love that. You've really made it simple. You know, become aware, learn to regulate, and then learn the skills to balance. It's that simple. And if, you know, we approach it as a skill to say, here's the formula, because there isn't a one size fits all.
No.
But there is a start, and that start is with self-awareness. It starts with getting to know yourself. When you know yourself, you know, maybe it's hot and I need to take my jacket off. Maybe it's cold and I need to put a jacket on, right? It's having that self-awareness of what are my responses to the internal and external stimuli, and how will I behave, and how do I regulate myself, jacket on, jacket off. But then what other skill sets, right? Maybe my jacket just kind of sits a bit half on, half off, because now I've learned that regulation means creating a balance, right? And it's a matter of now creating that balance with other people. And I so appreciate how you led me down this conversation. You said, normally have this conversation with a spouse. And I say, no, ain't gonna happen, because there's that emotional baggage, that memory that is holding us back, and how comfortable we are recognizing this is okay to have this conversation in a relationship, in a familiar situation, in between friends or colleagues or spouses, partners, right? The minute that we take this into our workplaces, the minute we apply it to the wider community, in our communities, and in our organizations, what happens? We put on this different persona, we put on a mask, and all of a sudden, it's not okay to have conversations about our emotions and our emotional intelligence. And, so people think, hey, you don't have the right to ask me how I'm feeling. You don't have the right to impact or make a comment about how I behaved. And I think we need to reset what I can or can't have the conversation about. Because I think in a workplace, it's not just ladder safety that I have to ensure, it's the emotional and the mental safety of the employees that we have to be accountable and responsible for. And when we're not having those much needed discussions about emotional intelligence and how to support each other through empathy and through transparency, those values that are so critical to the right behaviors, we just fail.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't the good fail where it's another opportunity to get up and do better. This is fail that we've created a culture where it's false. It's not going to build trust. We're going to get things done, but not productively. We become machines, not people. And to your point, that emotional intelligence is either the water that allows us to be fluid and right, go down the stream and learn, or it allows us to create the glue that needs to bind us together. What has been one almost impossible situation you've been thrown into that you had to help somebody fix? I'm sure you've had many, but
impossible. No such
thing. You're that kindergarten that got up and said, I am the queen today.
No such thing as impossible, because impossible is a state of mind, right? So that would be a fixed mindset. It's impossible to do that. And something you brought up so prolifically is the physiology of how our brain works. Is you just presented to us that we think these things and then we feel, and it is the other way around. We feel, and the feeling drives a thinking pattern that we are used to being in, like autopilot. And we have to learn to pay attention to that narrative, because the narrative drives the emotion to amplify. And pretty soon we're in what's called the emotional hijack. So we're behaving out of our emotion as opposed to controlling the emotion and turning on our IQ. It's a different part of our brain. But if our emotion is hijacking our behaviors, we can't access the prefrontal cortex. We can't even get to it, which is why EQ often matters more than IQ. If you can't regulate, you can't turn on your intelligence, your cognition intelligence. So then we end up making really bad decisions. That was a little bit of a tangent, because what were you asking me? Oh, the impossible situation.
Because there isn't an impossible situation, right? That's why you take the tangent.
But I will offer this into this space, because I've had a couple of clients in the last year that magnificent human beings, incredibly destructive behavioral patterns, and they needed to stop them point blank. And 3 different people with 3 almost different, blatantly catastrophic behaviors. One, like a hothead and would fly off the rails. The other, manipulative, like the quiet manipulation, where have you ever had someone look at you and just go, oh, straight, and like your posture gets better? I had a grade 8 teacher that had that power, where she would give you that look and you would just sit up straighter in your desk. And you're like, I'm pretty sure it's not me. Someone else. My
kids say I have that when we're having supper. Yeah. They say, Dad, that's the look. And I can never recreate it unless it happens naturally. And say, that's it.
Yeah. And then another one who got like really angry at people, different than the hothead, like the impulsiveness, really angry. And immediately out of the gates, this was the identified behavior that was like, you have got to stop this, because it is the locomotion off the rails that is destroying everything that intentionally you want. So all of your values, number one, we had to figure out what those were. every time you display this behavior, you act in conflict to your own value system, which feels awful when we do it. That's when we get into shaming and blaming behaviors. We do self-sabotage behaviors. We do self-soothing behaviors, all of the things that sometimes feel like short-term benefit, but really long-term destruction. And so with these particular individuals, with one of them, it was a switch. I'm like, you have a choice. You choose to do it or not do it, because he was that kind of personality type. I said, and today can be the day where you decide no more. It's not even an option. And he went away and messaged me the next day. And he's like, I am amazed that by just committing to the fact that I will not give this as an option to myself anymore, that I find different options. And I got emotional, as in that sense of pride, but also that sense of like overwhelming joy. And when I get in that state, I get teary-eyed because I know everything moving forward for them is going to be different.
And Teresa, for that person, it's like getting to the lights, and you don't have a green. So, I just want to kind of help out the listener here. It's not that you're saying you absolutely have to stop that. When you get to a red light, you don't go through, because you do. It's damaging. It's life-threatening, right? So that's why I think you're saying you don't have the option, right?
Yeah. And for the other individuals, we had to tweak the dial because their personality type was different, where just like, no more, not going to do it. And I'm point blank making the choice. I will not choose anger anymore. For the others, we had to tweak the dial and really get under the layers of what is the history of associations you have to this emotion that drives a lot of thinking. And we had to reprogram thinking. So basically, you're negating all of these limiting self-beliefs and getting under all of that narrative and changing the narrative so that when you're in the situation of the emotion again and you feel it, you can disrupt the narrative. So when you shift the thinking, you change the emotion. And now all of a sudden I've got a different emotional experience that I can create for myself by changing the thinking, just by adding a question like, what if I gave the most generous assumption of this person's intention? What would I feel then? Well, I wouldn't be pissed off anymore, that's for sure. I'd probably be curious. Well, that's a different state, isn't it? What do I do out of curiosity? Usually I ask a question. Well, asking a question is a heck of a lot better for relationship building than yelling at someone. Yeah.
Wow.
That's an option. That's what ends up happening.
Yeah.
So not necessarily impossible. There's always strategies that will work that help people on their journey. Yeah.
And even when the option is not that option, the option is the choice.
Yeah.
Right? You have the choice. And that's the power, as Stephen Covey says it, that's the single most powerful option that we have is the ability to choose, right? And, and I want to go to something that you said, and it's a fallacy that a lot of people, especially just like we talk about leadership these days, words like leadership and empowerment, I kind of want to hang them out to dry, and I want to take the clothespin and just release it and let them fly away, because we just have, they're diverse. And it's good to have a diverse definition of what they are. As you mentioned earlier, there's no one shoe fits all, right? Mm-hmm. But I just really cringe when today the topic is leadership, emotional intelligence. And I get a little queasy when people say to me, oh, what's your podcast about? Who are your audience? And I said, this is the Unfiltered podcast. It's for anyone wants to be a better person, better human. You can't go and be a better manager, a better leader, a better coworker, a better colleague, a better husband, a better wife, a better partner, a better father, mother, whatever. You can't be better if you can't start with yourself and start being better to yourself. And leadership starts with us. That change has to be instrumental to us leaning in, being curious about being that better person. So unfiltered means I take away all the shit, all the layers, all the privilege, all the masks that I put at home, at work, in the community, and I say, I am, but rather than I am being, right? And lean into being that authentically whole and good person that you want to see that change. But I go back to what people, just like empowerment and leadership and this too many definitions. When it comes to IQ and EQ, people are always thinking it's one or the other. And the way that help me make sure that I understood you correctly. EQ, and this is maybe a little too queasy here, or a little too, soft, But really, our EQ is that key. You go in through your heart. You lean in with wanting to lead through your heart, and you'll make the right decision by exercising the right cognitive capabilities or right faculties that you need to. And when we don't show up with a high level of EQ, we end up making wrong decisions that cost time, money, people, right? Did I hear you correctly, or did I add my own interpretation to this?
Yeah, our own interpretation works perfectly. Just like anyone who listens to your podcast will take from it what they're ready to hear and interpret in the way that makes most amount of sense for the application that's needed in their life, right? And the rest they'll just sort of leave behind them. But what you said was spot on in the essence that we can whittle it down to Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her research of psychology. She's like, 2 foundational emotions, fear and love. And if we even look at the emotional spectrum, like Dr. Plutick's work, his wheel of emotions, there's like hundreds of words to describe our emotional state. And humans, we experience the spectrum of them. So our emotional literacy, our language and vocabulary around emotion can be really quite broad. But if we want to start somewhere and look internally to us, we can whittle it down and go, am I experiencing fear or love right now? And if it's fear, it has all fear-based emotions have a feeling to them. They're all the ones that we would quantify as being unpleasant. All love-based emotions we would qualify as being pleasant. And so anytime we have a discomfortable, unpleasant emotional sense in our body, we're like, oh, I'm calling it anger, but anger is the most readily available emotion from fear. So we would have to dial it back one and ask ourselves, what am I afraid of right now?
Right.
Turns out most people are afraid of something along the lines of, I'm not enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not something enough. And we're afraid that we won't be connected. We're afraid that we won't be loved, which is the other side of fear. And those are Maslow's hierarchy. I think you brought this up. It's the foundation. Like love is high up on his hierarchy, but we need to draw it to the bottom.
Right.
The first one. Because if
it's a bit of yin and yang, right?
Connection, love, belonging. If we feel that, everything else happens. Because when we are connected, loved, and belong, someone provides food and shelter and provides those things for us. It's our tribe, it's our community. And we have gotten a really far ways away from that when we look at us as a globe, and the pandemic was a good spotlight to go, hey, pay attention to what's important.
Right.
And some people are definitely paying attention, and some people still need a bigger boulder.
Yeah. And it is so true. I hate wearing masks. I think they look ugly. They feel uncomfortable. But you know what? Non-negotiable. When I go out, I put them on. And it's because I'm afraid I will hurt the other person, and I want to love them enough to take care of themselves. They say the mask is not just protecting yourself, it's actually protecting the other person more. So to look at it from that perspective, that we can be afraid or we can act out of love, if we bring it together, recognize, what am I fearing? And then what is the right response? So that gives me hope. And the human beings are built on hope. So for anyone that, unless you're inherently evil, there's a few of us around, unless you're inherently evil, you probably just don't know. Fear lives in ignorance. And fear goes down the path of hatred if it becomes intentional, or if it remains in ignorance, it just goes into behaviors that I didn't mean to, right? And so once we recognize that we're not being intentional about being a bad person and acting out of fear and lashing out and hurting others, that's not why we're doing it, but there's some underlying reason why we behave in a certain way, dial it down. I'd like to think that while fear and love are probably opposing somewhere, at the seat of our soul and the seat of our heart, love will always triumph. And if we can start that, we were built with love, we were created with love, we are driven by love, we are moving towards a spectrum, a wide spectrum of love, where people will describe their love for things and others differently. Start there. I think the reason we look and why people are afraid of others who look different is we don't approach them with love. And if we can recognize that at the base of everything that we do, the seed of our soul is driven by love, that's not a bad place to start. So
it's a great place to start. It's the place.
That place to start.
Yeah.
Well, take me to the places where in my podcast, at the end, I always ask, dear guest, what one piece of advice can you give to the listener to help them become a better person, a better human being, a better leader, just a better human being? What piece of advice can you give, Teresa? That is our unfiltered thought of the week.
My piece of advice is, when you believe or desire to be better, you can be. And the power to do that is already inside of you. It takes perhaps some moments of solitude where we're alone with ourselves and simply considering, what is it that I want to do better? What is it that I am going to do better? And then go and do it.
And where you took us is that starting point of emotional intelligence. It starts with that self-awareness. So start deep, reflect, get to know yourself. You cannot know what's outside of you until you get to know what's inside of you. Thank you for sharing all that was inside of you, in your spirit and in your mind, and everything that you've done in your career. And I look forward to having you on here again. So thanks so much for taking the time, for enlightening me and enlightening the listener today. And thank you for being the unfiltered guest and the unfiltered leader that you are. All the best.
Thank you for having me. So much love.
Thank you.